Live from the world that never was, this is Derailed Trains of Thought. Welcome to episode 84 of Derailed Trains of Thought.
Hi.
This is Timothy Deal.
This is Nick Hayden.
And we are coming to you from a interesting cityscape here.
Yeah, I feel like I am here, even though apparently it never was here.
Yeah, this is apparently a world of non-existence.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here.
That exists.
Yeah. That's cool, and it's kind of gritty.
Yeah. I mean, we had to fight off some weird blobby monster things.
And it had nice neon lights, and it feels very kind of
like it could almost be like a noir thing.
Yeah.
If there wasn't that weird floating castle over that crater over there.
Yeah, it's cool, but a little frightening. Intimidating, I suppose.
Yes. I feel like we should be getting ready for a final battle of sorts.
Yeah, maybe I would like to have a sword of some sort. Maybe it's just non-existent, and I can use it anyways.
As long as you could summon it.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
I'm sure it can.
Well, anyway, Happy New Year, Nick.
Yes, Happy New Year, Tim. It's 2018.
Yes, we haven't podcasted like this for a whole year.
Yeah, or since last year at least.
Well, since last year. Yeah, it's been a year. That's the way the joke is supposed to go. It's been a year since the last time we did this.
Yeah,
Did you have a nice Christmas break?
Yes, it was a great Christmas break with the family and the New Year's evening with all the youth.
Oh, yes, your annual lock-in.
Yes, my annual staying up all night. It actually went really well. We were a little worried because we had a lot of new, young people, but it was great.
Cool. Well, and I just got back from a vacation myself. Usually you're the only one who gets to go on a winter vacation.
But now you got one.
I got one.
And you weren't even in a cold spot.
No, although it was colder down at Hilton Head Island than I've ever seen it before, because they actually had some snow in the ground, which I think even the week before they got more.
Okay.
And it was like in 28 years they hadn't seen anything like that. So
wow.
It was
for you, Tim.
Yeah, it felt a very historic time to visit. But we actually did have some nice weather. We got it to like mid 60s.
No, that's not bad.
A couple days. So yes,
it was 0 here just recently.
Yes.
A little warmer now, but well, not here, but back at home.
Yeah, back at home in Indiana.
Yeah.
Here, a little drizzle here, but otherwise we're doing okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're happy to be back podcasting with you. I suppose we should mention, we'll probably mention again at the end, but the weekly hijack has still been going on.
Yes, we just started back. Well, as of recording, we've just recently started back up.
Yes.
And it's Babylon 5.
Woohoo!
The best science fiction show very few people have watched.
If you've been listening to our podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard us talking about Babylon 5.
It would make, on the bingo that we were going to create, it would be a pretty good spot.
Yes. So much great storytelling in that series.
It is so you need to listen to our podcast, and you need to go hunt down Babylon 5 on go90.com.
Go90.com should really, they're not a sponsor, but they should be, because we're promoting. It's like there's this legitimate streaming site you've never heard of that it has at least one awesome show.
Like, no one else has Babylon 5, but there it is, this like corner of the internet that no one cares about.
Hopefully, again, if you've heard us talk about Babylon 5, never seen it, this is your chance. We specifically set up the podcast so the first half is just for people. We have Brianna Hayden, your sister-in-law, who has also never seen it. So we talk about it with her, and then in the second half is when we do spoiler stuff.
Because there's always spoiler stuff.
Yes,
almost.
I mean, obviously, we're recording the podcast right after watching an episode, so you don't want to listen to the podcast before you watch an episode.
No.
But after you watch the episode, and then avoid the spoiler section where we talk about things that happen way later in the show. Because there's tons of foreshadowing.
Season 1 is just all foreshadowing.
It's
honestly.
amazing.
Yeah.
We'll remind you, we'll plug that again at the end of the episode. But for right now, let's go on to Story School. So today in Story School, we are going to talk about plot.
Plot, which is oddly something we've not directly talked about that often.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of theme sort of things and things you do in your stories, but not plot specifically. I think this is partly because you've called yourself a very character-focused writer.
That's probably true, yes. So plot's a big topic.
Covers a lot of ground,
yes.
Potentially. Well, one of the reasons I thought this might be a good topic, I thought it'd be interesting to discuss the spectrum between a simple plot and a complicated plot.
All right, Tim. Define for me, what do you mean by simple? Not many moving parts?
The sort of movie, like say an action movie that you get done and it's like there was nothing to that.
Okay. So there could be a lot of movement, but just not much. Because like some action movies, there's lots of set pieces, but not much happens in terms of moving forward.
Not plot progression.
Like if you summarize it, it's basically they lost the thing and then they found it again.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, here's something I will argue over the course of this discussion probably. I think there's good simple and bad simple, and there's probably good complicated and bad complicated.
Well, let's since we're on simple, let's talk good and bad simple.
Okay. I think good simple, your short stories, you've kind of perfected this having written.
Well, trying to.
You've written like 100 flash fictions at this
103,
point? 103.
Not counting not counting the ones that went for Joe and the Wells.
Okay. So short stories, flash fictions, even, cartoons. You don't need much complicated stuff in a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
No.
You want that to be kind of direct and to the point. So that's what do you find enjoyable about doing a story in this kind of condensed format?
Well, I guess the one of the benefits of a simple plot is that you're focusing on one thing, so that's all you're feeling, thinking about. It's like you're not distracted. It's just here it is. Mm-hmm. I recently watched Castle Cagliostro with my children, and the plot's relatively simple and relatively basic. Hey, girl, rescue the girl, get away. And there's some twists and whatever, but it's very focused. Simple plots are very focused. And there's that sounds. I was going to say there's a simplicity about it. But what I mean by that is that, by simplicity, I mean there's a sort of wholesomeness, a sort of
purity.
Purity, yeah. I like purity to it. That it is what it is, and you can, when it's done well, absorb that. It's like, it's just a really nice picture, a really nice photograph. It's just the beauty's in the lines and in the composition, not in the detail.
Okay.
Maybe.
I guess if you could put it in a different analogy, maybe like say a cooking analogy, you can have very basic bread, but depending on how you season it, if you do a little bit of, cheeses or I don't know how you season. I'm not a cook, so maybe this isn't the best
Well,
analogy.
how about this? I've eaten for lunches for most of my life peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they're always good. Okay. No, but peanut butter and jelly sandwich is one of those simple delights. Well, okay, I love peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but one of those simple delights that it's just peanut butter, jelly, and bread, but it's always good.
There you go. But then at the same time, sometimes you could have, like, say, a pot roast that for some reason just didn't wind up having a whole lot of flavor to it.
Yeah.
I mean, for whatever reason, it was just bland meat. And I think that's one of the reasons why I say Castle Cagliostro works so well. It's like, yeah, you've got a lot of familiar elements, an evil count, a forced marriage, a dashing thief.
Yeah.
But it's in the seasoning. It's in all of the flavors that combination of things adds to that formula.
Yeah.
That makes it so cool.
I concur. And I guess that's the bad simple, it's like the action movie. Some of the more generic action movies is that things are happening, but the simplicity doesn't make you love it more. It makes you bored. It's not the sort of simplicity that brings out the flavor. It's the sort that just it just mashed together.
Yeah. It's like all structure.
It's all our culinary references tonight. No, but I mean, some simplicity is that you couple things so you bring out the flavor. You add just this to bring out the, as opposed to just like, we're just going to smash it all together and it'd be delicious.
Right. Yeah, one of the reasons I was thinking about this in terms of that sort of spectrum, I remember a while back seeing a tweet by Andrew Stanton.
Yes.
The director of Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. And
John Carter.
Underrated.
Yes.
A couple episodes of Stranger Things.
Yes, this last season.
Actually, yeah. And he said something along the lines, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly how he said it. That if your characters are too simple and your plot is too complicated, you've got it backwards. You should have complicated characters with a relatively straightforward story.
Okay.
It's kind of what he was arguing.
Another example of a simple plot would be Dunkirk. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just basically survive.
Yeah.
I mean, there's little things here, but it's basically just one kind of idea over and over again. Mm-hmm. But he pulls out that flavor masterfully.
And I guess you could say similar sort of things like, say, the first Alien movie, or a number of your, kind of horror monster sort of things. There's really usually only one thing you want to do, and that's run away from the monster.
Yeah.
But it's in how you do that. And you can have, and Alien does have some very, they're just interesting enough. They're not stale cardboard cutouts. Ripley she's interesting. There's that company guy that kind of betrays them. He's interesting. So there's a situation where you've got interesting characters and a pretty straightforward sort of scenario, and that can make for some pretty good storytelling. Mm-hmm. Now, I said earlier, though, that I do think that there's also a place for complicated stories.
Yes.
And I'd say one of the more obvious places for this would be a mystery.
Yeah.
In a mystery, you want good characters. Any good story, you want to have good characters in it. But part of the fun of a mystery is you don't want to figure it out too easily. Yeah. You want there to be lots of like weird little pieces that come together in a... You
like the twists and the turns and the red herrings and the... Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want to ramble around in a mystery. You don't want to go you don't want a straight line.
Yeah. I've been watching some Let's Plays of a series called Danganronpa again recently, which I think I've talked about it before. I have a love-hate relationship with it because it has some elements that I really can't recommend it to people. But man, the mysteries and the suspense that it has are really, really good. But so it's a game. It's not quite a point and click. It's more like have you ever heard of a visual novel?
Just from you.
Okay. Well, it's like a combination of manga and video game.
It's kind of like a choose your own adventure.
Almost choose your own adventure-ish sort of thing, and it depends on the novel. This is really the only one I follow. I guess Phoenix Wright is kind of visual novel-esque.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so
it's almost on the rails, but they give you the illusion of freedom.
Yes. Yeah. And a big part of the mystery, of course, is finding all the clues to the killer. And by the time you actually put in each of the mysteries in Danganronpa, they're always a murder mystery, which is horrible because you actually grow to love every single character in it, and then they all
die.
Most of them die. But then you're like, but the mystery, I want to solve their murder because it's so intriguing. But by the time you actually piece together what has happened, you're like, this has got to be the most convoluted murder plot ever. But because it works as a game, it was really it's a great way to like pin all these piece all these things together. So it's complicated, but the complicated is part of the appeal, I think.
I think books in general have more leeway for complicatedness, especially when you got series. Mm-hmm. Because you don't keep a series going by going in a straight line.
That's true.
Having read Wheel Time.
I was going to say.
I'm pretty soon I'm going to start the third book of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. It's like 1,100 pages. I mean,
you have a book that long. There's no way you've got just a simple story on your hands.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you'll have just lots of simple stories crammed next to each other. Or like even like the first, and sometimes just lots of detail. Sometimes it can still be a simple story, but a long book. Mm-hmm. Like the Eye of the World, the first Wheel Time book, is really just Fellowship of the Ring. I mean, it's really leaving town and going on an adventure. So it's pretty simple, but there's so much world, there's so many events that happen on the way that it takes a long time. Now it gets a lot more complicated. Whenever you get politics involved in books.
Yeah.
I've been rewatching season 2 of The Crown.
Okay.
I'm not sure where to put that, whether in complicated or simple, honestly. Because on one hand, complicated politics are like some of those movies, you have the 3-hour movie and have all the moving pieces and it's complicated. Or West Wing, you got lots of info. Mm-hmm. But like The Crown's interesting because they take a long time to milk one or two themes in like an episode.
Okay.
So sometimes there'll be politics happening, but it still feels simple because it's all pushing towards one kind of feeling or idea. So it's all tied together really well.
Okay. That's an interesting way to balance the two, I think, then, because if you have multiple plots going on, that by itself leans a certain level of complexity to it. But if they're all if you can tie them all thematically in some way, then it doesn't feel quite that.
And they're like intercut, and it's almost more about, in like some episodes, almost more about the idea of separation or marriage falling apart or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it just has to be illustrated with the Suez Canal and the prime minister being sick and all this other stuff that could get complicated, but at least the way it's portrayed is much more, it winnows out all the complicatedness and just until there's just a couple things. It's interesting.
And that's, I guess in some ways you have to do that to a degree because, real life can be more complicated than, a basic story. So if you're going to, if you're, because that's a historical drama, right?
Yeah.
So is it Victoria?
No, it's the current queen.
Oh, it's the current queen. Oh, okay. But anyway, real life can be a lot more complicated than your fairy tale story is going to be.
Like nonfiction books can be much more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Like biographies and histories. Because there's just so many moving pieces, and you almost just get a summary of so. And that's why a lot of times they're big. I just finished the Martin Luther book. It's 400 pages, and it's still a summary. I mean,
but even historians, though, I think will try to look, even though they have to capture, all the things that happen. They'll still sort of try to thematic, like
they'll winnow it. They'll connect the piece. They'll connect dots that you wouldn't necessarily
have done in real life.
Yeah,
or
because they can telescope it. They can see 5 years at a time as opposed to day by day by day by day.
Yeah.
So they catch the threads. And so being a historian would be very interesting. You just sift through all this stuff and try to make a narrative out of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the tricky things about being a historian. How honest is the historian being with it?
Yeah.
Or is he like imposing a narrative where it was just random events?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thought.
So back to complicated. Give me an example of a good complicated movie.
A good
or book, I suppose.
I've been thinking video games lately, actually.
Okay.
But
they have a lot more time.
They have a lot more time in a video game. I guess for a complicated, let's go. I'm going to answer your question, and we'll come back to the video game thing. I think an enjoyable complication thing in a movie can also be something like charade, or I'm trying to think of another Hitchcock thing that was similar to charade. One of these. Not just where, I guess it's part mystery, but it's not like murder mystery. It's like there's spies and you're not sure who is really the trustworthy person, and there's like shifting allegiances and stuff. The first Mission Impossible movie, some people I remember saying was maybe a little too complicated, but it was also had a little bit more intrigue than, say, Mission Impossible 2, which was much more
straightforward,
bravissimo and, kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Here's a question. Where would you put on the scale from simple to complicated, something like Last Jedi?
Oh, that's a very good question. By the way, folks, in case you were wondering where this is, we did record a conversation of us talking about The Last Jedi. It's not, but then I went on vacation. So we haven't actually edited that yet. But we'll come out at some point long after anyone cares about Last Jedi anymore.
But we'll have done it.
But yeah, Last Jedi was I still probably need to see it a second time because there was a lot going on in that movie.
Now, here's my question. By a lot going on, is it a lot of plot going on or a lot of theme character going on? And can you separate them?
I'm not sure if you could separate them because I think it is both, at least in that situation. Yeah. Now, I think you can have another movie where there is lots of plot and the characters aren't really growing. In Last Jedi, though, I feel like I think both things are happening.
So, like a complicated plot with bad characters be something like a Transformers movie?
How about maybe some of the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels?
Okay, that makes sense to me. Okay.
Yeah, because there's probably a lot more. You go to see a Pirates movie, you really just want to have fun and swashbuckling, but a lot of those movies tended to have.
Well, the third one was super complicated.
Which one?
The third.
Oh, yeah. Way more lore stuff, trying to world building than you really needed for a Pirates movie. It's like, we have to turn our ships upside down to go to the afterlife, and then we have to do this and find this magical artifact. And actually, while we were on vacation, I finally saw the most recent Pirates, number 5. And it was like a lot of the Pirates movies, it was a mess, but man, it had its moments. But it was similar sorts of things like, why are you making all your characters and actors go through all these hoops? I remember even Johnny Depp saying on set for 2 or 3, is like, wait, what's going on again?
Yeah. So there's a complicatedness that in some ways is a method of the plot, like mysteries. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not the same thing without it being complicated.
Right.
And there's one that complicated basically hides makes you not understand it.
Yeah. Sometimes I think this might be inadvertent. I don't know that it's always just as a cover up of not having, interesting characters. Sometimes I do think it happens because creators have so many ideas of what they might want to do in their story, and then they have some sort of plot to try to connect all these things.
So probably, honestly, creators should probably learn more how to simplify stories.
As a general rule.
Generally. I mean, obviously there's exceptions.
Yeah. I mean, I do think...
Especially the longer it gets.
Yeah. I do think, and this is going to be my personal taste here a little bit, but I do think there is a certain charm in... I'm just going to talk about Kingdom Hearts here for a minute.
This.
I think there's a certain charm. Everyone knows Kingdom Hearts has probably an overly complicated plot, but part of me really kind of likes that.
I think there is something about overly complicated plots, especially ones that it doesn't quite mesh together. I don't know about Kingdom Hearts, whether it meshes completely. That creates an investment in the reader or audience,
or at least it can.
Or it can. Like I think Lost did that.
Yeah.
I think The Prisoner.
Okay. Or you're trying to, part of the fun is almost trying to like theorize about how all these intricate parts kind of fit together.
Evangelion. I mean, yeah, like, there's a method to the madness, or at least you believe there's one.
Well, and there's even, it's interesting that, to me, that Kingdom Hearts sometimes gets a lot of flack for this, in some ways deserved, but at the same time, on YouTube, people love to do complicated conspiracy theories about stories that really don't need it.
Like Jar Jar Binks is a Sith Lord.
Yeah, something like that. Or, all these... Mario is actually this evil person that wants to that has been controlling the Mushroom Kingdom, or these goofy, complicated things that they come up with all this contrived stuff to have this fun little theory,
like the unified Pixar theory.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, come on, guys, that's not true, but it's almost more fun to have these crazy, convoluted schemes.
Like physics has a theory of everything. That everything there's an equation that captures all physics, and the human mind purposely wants to make connections out of things.
Yeah,
and so when something you enjoy and there's that much plot, you find,
or even if there's not enough plot, like you want to add more plot to it.
Well, I mean, when I was in Mill Wheel time and all my friends reading it, there's so much talk about this and that and the other thing, because that's the excitement of having so much material.
Yeah. And that's why people love theorizing about Lost while it was ongoing. And it's definitely, so there's an element of complication that I think can be really fun for an audience. I do think, like I said, though, it is sort of a matter of taste. There's some kind of people that's not going to appeal to.
Yeah.
I may have talked at some point before about when I read Kevin Murphy's book.
Oh, yes.
About going to movies and stuff. And there was a story that stuck with me from when he went to see The Fellowship of the Ring, because it was when that was in theaters. And he was overhearing somebody else in line talking about, some minutia of Tolkien lore that the movie didn't get right or stuff like this. And Kevin thought to himself how he used to be sort of like that in college, loving tracking down, where such and such magic item came from. The sword is from Gondolor and, all that kind of stuff. Whereas as an older adult, he was less and less interested in that sort of thing, wanted to see more character interactions, more character studies in his movies and stuff. And I totally respect that. In some ways, that is deeper than just this kind of surface level of, well, this connects to this, you see, and there's this family tree over here. I think even Tolkien sort of like poked fun at himself sometimes in like the House of Healing, is that what it's called? In Return of the King.
Yeah.
There's some lore master there who, when Gandalf or Aragorn asks about, I think, Kingsleaf, he's like, well, he goes into this long spiel about it and he's like, well, we don't have any. And Gandalf snaps, well, then find someone who has less lore and more sense. So I think even Tolkien kind of like to poke fun. Like it's fun to create all this interconnected plot, but sometimes you have to realize it's not the end goal of a story necessarily.
Yeah, and I suppose sometimes creators like to make up all that stuff, but then transferring it into a plot that's interesting to other people becomes the balancing act of how much do people care about this minutia.
And I think it is harder for fantasy in general.
Yeah.
That's one thing that is a valid complaint about Final Fantasy 15, that sometimes the cosmology world building was so kind of pushed off in the corner that sometimes things happen. You're like, wait, why did we do all this?
So they pushed the characters so much and downplayed
some of the world building that sometimes you didn't really have a context for what was going on.
So a little more complicated up front might have been helpful.
Yeah. Now I know one reason why that happened that way, because 15 is such an open world game almost on purpose. Like the last The last single-player Final Fantasy before this was 13, which some people called Final Hallway 13 because it was so straightforward, they said, and you didn't have much room to explore at all.
Yeah.
So 15 was like made it wide open so that you can go wherever, you can do all these side quests. If you really wanted to find out about the cosmology, there were these little books scattered around that you could read or listen to this certain radio broadcast, but it could be very easy to miss some of that stuff. Which, again, that's some of the complications with telling stories in an interactive medium.
Yeah.
But yeah, finding the perfect way to integrate the lore in a way that makes sense while keeping your basic story simple can be walking a very fine line at times.
Yeah. So really, creators have, if they make it too simple, if they make it simple and boring, people are just like, well, I've seen this a million times. Who cares? And make it complicated and overly complicated, then people are like, oh, I can't get through it. So it's somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between. That's the, at least that's where you're going to hit the widest spectrum. What's the 4-quadrant thing, as they say in movie biz.
I do enjoy the send and quote. Complicated characters help a lot.
Yeah.
In general.
I mean, if you're focusing on a character study, that might be a good starting point. And, having the complicated characters that can push you through, even if you've got a weak plot, then there'll still be something interesting. Learn something about this person, and in that perspective, you learn about yourself.
Do you think there's examples of complicated plots where you purposely make the characters simple because you wanted the plot to be the point?
I think you can compare different versions of Sherlock Holmes to this, actually.
Okay.
Like new Sherlock, BBC Sherlock, the characters, there's a lot of character study in that, but the plots, the mysteries are pretty complex too. So there you're sort of having best of both worlds. In the original books, it's hard to say. I mean, Sherlock and Watson were always very vibrant. You knew who Sherlock and Watson were, but there wasn't like that much character growth.
No, that's
from
true.
Story
They
to
were
story.
well, a lot of mystery. I mean, a lot of even modern TV mysteries are largely just fun characters that don't change, with the plot being basically an excuse for letting the characters interact with each other.
So,
Which is actually opposite than Sherlock Holmes, I guess, because that's really just an excuse for Sherlock Holmes' excuse to have complicated mysteries.
yeah, in a lot of ways, that's true. So I guess, that's interesting about mystery. There's two very different ways to do that. I mean, you're talking about your fun characters. That's kind of your
like your psych and your
monk and
where it's almost more about watching. I mean, the mystery's not important, but you show up for whatever mystery as long as so and so is in it.
Yeah, pretty much. Well,
all right.
I know when we started, I'm not sure where we're going with this conversation today.
This was interesting. I'm surprised we have not talked about this directly.
Yeah.
In the last 7-8 years.
Well, one thing we've been finding out about podcasting, like storytelling has a lot of potential topics to cover, which is nice.
Yes.
But with that will be our story school for the day. And now we will go on into soundtrack. For my soundtrack today, I decided I really wanted something Kingdom Hearts for reasons that we've already covered, basically. And thankfully, I'm not going to be able to play this whole song because it's a little long, but I'll play a nice chunk from it. This is from Kingdom Hearts 2. The remix is called Duet of the Keyblade Masters. And it's a piano duet, which I think is super cool. And also like that it's from a different track than just Simple and Clean or Dearly Beloved. Which, don't get me wrong, I love those songs, but it seems like everybody remixes those songs.
Yeah.
And come on, guys. Yoko Shimomura has got some awesome tracks across the entire Kingdom Hearts series. But this is Duet of the Keyblade Masters. It's done by Uboichi.
Sure.
Boichi.
Normally I get those names.
Yeah, weird. Anyway, like I said, this is only an excerpt from it. If you want to hear the whole thing, go check it out, an OC remix. But I think you'll enjoy. And we're back.
Hello, Tim. That was nice. I enjoyed it.
Yes, it's pretty fun. Actually, you should ask my sister Rachel to play some of that. They actually have the sheet music available
really?
somewhere online, and it's pretty cool.
Cool.
Although I don't know if she's ever played it as a duet with anyone. I'll have to ask her about that.
Cool.
Anyway, let's go on to our next segment
Our take.
on Tales.
All right. So I thought it would be fun, and Tim agreed,
I do agree.
that
Hear ye.
we always do our summer movie take on Tales, sometime late summer. I thought in January we need to do our year in review of books to kind of review some books that we've read over the year, and then also maybe give you some suggestions for this year of things that we liked and you should read.
Now, this won't keep us from talking about books that we really want to talk about as we read them, of
That's
course,
true.
during the year. A couple of these from last year we have already talked
And
about.
we'll just point you in the right direction to hear our
Yeah.
extended conversation.
So now, are we just talking book club books, or were you going to mention some other books? That
I
you
was going to
read?
mention a handful of other ones, but
Okay, because you've been, as usual, you are the much more avid reader than I am, because writing is kind of your thing.
yeah, and yeah, I can't. Yeah, I'm always reading, trying to get through something. So
Yeah, so I will be able to join in on a couple of these.
But Tim and I are part of a book club, and that's where a lot of these come from.
We call it the No Pressure Book Club, which is good because sometimes we're busy and
We don't read it.
yeah.
All right, so early on last year, we read The Silmarillion to begin with.
That was the January book.
Just as a general, if you don't know Silmarillion for some reason, listen to this podcast.
What's wrong with you?
It's Tolkien is really the work that he started working on and always wanted to was his
Finish.
main work, really. The history of Middle Earth. And it is wonderful. It is thick and it is dense, and there are a lot of names starting with F and E.
This is a good kind of complicated, actually.
It is, yeah, this is a very good kind of complicated. It's one of those books that it's beautiful, and if you have the mindset to read a book like this, do it.
Yeah. There will be some sections. Now, I didn't read through actually all this myself this time because I think I had just read it like maybe a year or two ago. But yeah, there's definitely sections that are more history telling than storytelling.
Yeah, some of it
ways.
feels very like Old Testament, like you're reading the Book of Judges and they're giving the land out to the tribes, sort of stuff. Like there's a whole section with the movement of the elves across the land, and it's. I mean, it reads like history. It does not read like a novel.
No, not at all.
The end reads more like stories we're used to.
Yeah, more in the latter half. There's three big ones. You can tell Tolkien spent a lot of time on these. Of Turin Turambar, of Beren and Luthien, which is probably Tolkien's shining jewel of short stories. It's amazing. And can't think of the guy who sails into the
See, Elendil?
Yeah, Elendil. Basically the last chapter.
Yeah.
That was a big deal.
And it's written purposely the way, like the first chapter is a creation story, and it's written very that style, and it becomes more oral story-ish. The newer in history it is. I mean, he does a lot of language choices based on how old, quote unquote, the story is.
Yeah. Of course,
like the Numenor section reads completely different than
Yeah, it does. It feels more a little closer to what we read in Lord of the Rings almost.
Yeah.
Not quite that much, but it's not quite as
it's an in between.
Yeah, it's an in between. It's really interesting because the vast majority of the book takes place in the first age of Middle Earth, and then in Numenor
Is the second age.
Is the second age, and then there's a little chapter that's about the third age before
which
you
is
get
basically
to,
the War of the. I mean, basically, third age is what ends with the Fellowship of the Rings, right?
Yeah, right. So
or with
the Lord of the
King,
Rings and
yeah.
Return of the King.
Anyways, basically anything ever mentioned in Lord of the Rings and songs and stuff shows up in Silmarillion.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing after reading this Silmarillion to go to Lord of the Rings and realize. Actually know what they're talking about. Last time I went through my Tolkien read through, it was just so much cooler. It's like, oh, Baron Luthien, this is a big deal. Wait, the sword's from Gondolor?
Yeah, exactly. Like sometimes it just feels like, oh, just some name you throw around because it's a fantasy novel. But like, no, there's a history here.
Yeah.
Like a deep history.
Yeah. Gondor and Gondolor. Am I saying that right? Gondolin.
Gondolin, I think.
That's what it is. They're two different places. But yes, Gondolin was
and then
super cool.
What's the forest everyone's hiding into? That's where Luthien comes from.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's not coming to mind.
Melian, or was that
Melian? That's the
queen.
That's the queen.
Oh,
I want to say Turgon, but I think that's the father.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, where they live.
Yes.
So, anyways, I think our recommendation would be read it.
Yes, if it sounds at all interesting to you, check it out. If you've been putting it off, check it out.
Put on your list. All right. After that, we read The Princess Bride, the book.
Yes, this is one I did not get to.
And honestly, it was probably my most disappointing one of the year of our book club.
Now, had you read it before?
No, I'd never read it.
Okay.
Here's the problem. The things that are like the movie are just like the movie, which are good, but I don't want to read it if I can watch it.
Uh-huh.
And the things that they add are kind of interesting. But my main thing is that it's just the book comes off more cynical than the movie does. There's a whole like intro about the author, how he came to write this book, and this whole conceit that he found it from this other guy. But sets it up very cynically, just the worldview, not so much the book. And then just the love stories like the movie, you always feel like, well, they're making fun of convention, but they're also, it's more of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Isn't this fun? The book, you get a little more of the like, but yeah, just a little, not hardcore, but just, I didn't like that.
Almost like he's being too smart for his own good.
Or just like, you're more mocking true love than ribbing it.
Okay.
In some ways, like.
Yeah, there is a difference.
You're mocking sort of the way things, tradition, I don't know. It has a different feel. Now, Fezzik is much more complicated. His backstory is probably the most interesting thing in the book. And he has kind of a sad backstory. And it's interesting. He's the most interesting character because he's like the only one with like any character. I mean, outside of just being like a cardboard cutout. Like he has a backstory and he's interesting. But yeah, I just stick with the movie, honestly. If I would people ask, some people, it's interesting to read as a thing. I think came out before the movie did, and it's written the same guy, and there's a lot of it that's word for word. I mean, a lot of it.
He must have known which parts were
funny and good. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I would pass personally.
Okay. So first one a good, second one pass. That was our February book.
And then Till We Have Faces, which we talked about a lot in this podcast.
We did. That was
our myth podcast,
episode 76.
Okay, so we talked about Till We Have Faces in episode 76. Basically, go there if you want to hear us talk substantial about myths and Lewis and Till We Have Faces, but
great read.
Just read it.
Yeah, no, I mean, C.S. Lewis is going to be a good read. And
it was one of the last C.S. Lewis I read, I think.
It was certainly one of the last fiction books. I don't know if there's any C.S. Lewis fiction I haven't read yet, unless you count The Pilgrim's Regress.
I have not read that. I think the only thing I read after this was That Hideous Strength, which was very strange.
Oh, yes. I know there's a lot of his nonfiction and poems that I've read those at all.
Yeah.
But no, this is definitely one that's going to stick with me. I think the scene that still sticks with me the most is her rant and the
at the end.
Yeah, at the end. I think of that thing quite a bit, actually.
And Tim and I were talking about another time about how sometimes understanding the author helps a lot in getting books. Understanding Lewis's relationship with myth and stuff like that does help with this book, but I don't think you need that.
Yeah, I can see that.
But anyways, read it.
Yep. All right, so what's next?
Book of Strange New Things.
Oh, yes, that's another one we talked about.
Substantially.
That one we talked about just in a previous Our Take on Tales, I believe.
Yes.
Episode 79.
A substantial talk about it there. That's where you should get the most of it. But basically, it's about a missionary that goes to a alien planet, and a lot of other weird things happen. It's a fascinating book. It's a great book club book.
Mm-hmm. It'd be the ideal situation for it, I think, because you want to talk about it and discuss it, and not everyone is going to have read this book.
Yeah, and it's one you want to discuss, and one that is ambiguous enough that people will have different views on.
Yes, I think they could have very different views. You and I had some different ideas, perspectives on it, which we usually are always on the same page for things. I will say too, though, I was thinking about this. Strangely enough, another book with a rant toward the end that I loved for completely different reasons.
Was that Kurtzman?
I think so.
Okay,
not the main character.
No.
In this case, but
I would recommend to anyone who likes literary fiction, science fiction, just things that are weird collection of. It's not your normal book in any. I mean, it is a strange new thing.
It is a strange new thing, but worth the experience.
It is worth the experience.
I remember when I first finished, I was like, I don't know if this is worth it. But then a couple months later, I was like, man, I'm glad I read that. It was memorable.
I am glad. Yeah, that's probably the one I was maybe not most surprised by, but it's very thought provoking.
Yes.
In lots of ways. Okay. Anyways. After that was Three Musketeers,
which I had not read this one yet, or still haven't.
I don't think I'd ever read any Dumas.
I read The Count of Monte Cristo several years ago, But unfortunately, it didn't really stick with me. I mean, I remember liking it a lot, but tell me if this was true in The Three Musketeers. From what I remember, Dumas, it was complicated in that Victorian sense of you could tell he wrote this over a long period of time, probably serialized or something.
You could tell it was serialized. It very much had different modes to it. It felt like 2 or 3 different books. Looking back, I enjoyed it and I'm glad I read it. I remember in the middle of it thinking it was all over, like the beginning's kind of like, okay, what's happening here? And then right in the middle is like, these guys are horrible people. And then a little bit after that, like, yeah, D'Artagnan is just a misogynist. And then at the end, like, this is Musketeers.
It finally became what you thought the Three Musketeers was supposed to be.
Yeah, it goes through a lot of phases because it was serialized. I mean, the beginning's just introducing people, and it's the beginning's fun. The middle, they're just kind of horrible people. I mean, they're drunks and liars and thieves and adulterers, and I mean, there's a lot of that French sort of like mistresses and purposely making people fall in love with you so that you can take their money. And I mean, they're really kind of horrible moral people.
Wow.
But they're also portrayed in this sort of like haha, where right in the middle section. It's being played for humor, but it's, humor is based on people's foibles, and they seem the worst So in some ways, the Musketeer is almost better as the sort of the idea that's been transformed 10 million times in different things than in the actual plot of the book. Now, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in the book, and the end is particularly musketeer-y. But yeah, it's like a lot of old Victorian serialized stuff. It's all over the place.
Okay.
And so if you like that sort of stuff or you want to experience it, read it, but I don't think it's like a
must read.
A must read. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
All right. Fantasties, which you've started, right?
I have started. I've not gotten very far. I've read like maybe the first 5 chapters, I think.
I would say the Fantasties starts slow.
Okay. Yeah, so far it's just about a guy who kind of wanders into fairyland, and it's more of and I don't know if the whole book is like this, it's more of a just kind of seeing things and exploring things.
Kind of, but Fantasties was probably in some ways the most surprising because I had a hard time reading it. I tried to read it on my iPad. I could not get into it. And then I changed the mode I was reading it in, and I don't know whether because of a certain spot or because of the method I was reading it. It takes a very interesting turn about halfway through.
Okay. By the way, if the listeners don't know fantasies,
I guess we shouldn't mention
because it's not as common. Yeah, this is a George MacDonald book. George MacDonald wrote a number of fairy tales. He was a big influence on Lewis and probably Tolkien too. Probably
and maybe Chesterton. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be Chesterton too. Yeah, actually, and I think he was huge influence on Lewis.
He shows up in Great Divorce?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Like I said, it starts off with a guy kind of wandering into fairyland.
Yeah, and a lot of it's just run around fairyland.
Okay.
And first off, he does a great job of that sort of portraying fairyland as actually this otherworldly fairy realm in the old school sense of fairy realm.
Yeah.
And he does that remarkably. There's a lot of just sort of like just strange, fantastical things that you don't. It feels like old school fantasy as opposed to modern fantasy is too. It's a lot of it's very. It feels like it's modern sensibilities with dragons.
Yeah.
Or magic, as opposed to feeling actually otherworldly. This book has a lot of that. And then it has a lot of very interesting themes on sorrow and love and stuff later on. So I really appreciate it. And I think I would like to, my first MacDonald, I'd read a shorter thing called The Light Princess. But I would like to read another.
I think I read The Light Princess. John Baylor once, he and Stephen, when I was doing kind of a rooming situation with them for a while, they actually gave me a copy of George MacDonald's fairy tales. There's a book of collection of them.
Okay.
I think it's is it a Penguin collection?
I probably would be, yeah.
But it's pretty cool. I've read probably about half of them. But yeah, no, he does fairy setting very well. So I knew that would be a neat thing going into it. I'm trying to remember if there's even like excerpts from fantasies in it or not. Are there sections that you could kind of cut out as a standalone?
Maybe early on, especially. Yeah,
we'll see.
There's parts of it that reminds me of Wizard of Earthsea. There are parts of it that just have, you could tell that Lewis or Tolkien were influenced by, but it's a very interesting, fascinating book.
Okay.
Again, it's a little old, little slow to get into, but it gets better and better as you read it.
Okay.
So if you're that sort of person, read it.
Sounds good.
I liked it substantially. It's one of the best ones of the year.
Yeah. Cool. I'm looking forward to reading more.
All right. Next was Hellboy.
A graphic novel.
Yeah. Seed of Destruction. Just the
introduction of Hellboy.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So what do you think about this one?
This is interesting. If you don't know who Hellboy is, he's a big red devil-ish guy. Basically, he's a demon that was someone from hell.
Yeah.
But raised to be a good guy.
So he's like this kind of mild man. I mean, he gets angry.
Yeah.
But he's kind of this mild-mannered,
paranormal detective.
like English. Like, yeah. It's a fascinating dichotomy. Is that the right thing?
Yeah.
Juxtaposition. It's kind of like The Thing for Fantastic Four.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
kind of the same sort of gruff. Well,
it's different because Ben Grimm's a little more gruff, and Hellboy is actually pretty not proper, but
respectful.
Yes, he has this sort of English respect for people and his elders and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Although I never pictured him talking with a British accent. I don't think he does. At least
No.
I've seen the first movie a long time ago, but I didn't honestly remember a whole lot of it.
So it's very. I mean, it's very gothic.
Yes, very gothic.
It's like Indiana Jones meets
Lovecraft.
Yeah, kind of.
It's not a setting that I don't like Lovecraft stuff. I don't go for horror genre stuff in general, but it was a very enjoyable. The way they did it in this comic, I thought was enjoyable. I mean, that was because of the art style.
And the art style is very stark, but works really well for this content.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I felt toward the end that it's kind of cool, and this giving a little bit away, but you find out the main villain is Rasputin, brought back from the dead, because that's what Rasputin does. Yeah. And I felt like he monologued a little bit too much in the second half about how awesome he was and that kind of stuff. And I always will find the heroes more interesting. Yeah. But like I said, I'm glad I checked it out. I'd seen it for a long time, didn't know much about it, but it was cool.
Yeah, I really liked it. It did seem like there was almost a little too much Deus Ex Machina near the end of it. Like just weird supernatural things happening. But I enjoyed reading it. Mm-hmm. Then finally, to finish off the year, we had The Chimes by Charles Dickens, which is one of his Christmas stories.
Yes.
Well, technically a New Year's story.
Yeah, more of a New Year's story, but it's called one of his Christmas short stories, sort of, because it's part of a similar vein. It was published the year after A Christmas Carol.
It's kind of like the Christmas Carol from the Cratchit's point of view.
Sort of, yeah. Because the person who has kind of a ghostly encounter in this case is a poor person. It's not a rich Scrooge. It's an average person who basically
feeds into the lies that the poor people are
fed,
are morally evil because they're poor.
Yeah,
in some ways.
Yeah,
or are destined to be morally evil. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. It is
very Dickens.
It's very Dickens. It feels a little more of its time than
A Christmas Carol
does.
Christmas Carol sort of ascends its time in a sense. The Chimes feels a little bit more of its time.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed reading it, but it's a different beast. If you haven't read Christmas Carol, read that instead.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with that. The Chimes is almost like an entire just the Ghost of Christmas Future. Mm-hmm. Like of the
Cratchits.
yeah. Because of that, it's a fair bit darker.
I think if you read it with people, you could probably have some discussions on poverty and how you deal, how society should interact with people, because there's a lot of commentary on that from Dickens. I mean, it's all rooted in Victorian sensibilities, but I think you could probably massage it into modern life.
I mean, again, if you've already read A Christmas Carol and you want to...
And you like Dickens.
Yeah, so we kind of have this idea. We'll see if we keep it up, because last year we did A Christmas Carol, so we thought, well, Dickens has written a couple of these Christmas short stories. Let's try to go through all of them, one each year. And so this is the second one, so we'll see what the next one is like.
Right. Do we have... That was all our book club books.
Yep.
Do I have time for one more?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I read some other books. I have kids, so we read some with them. So I want to do one of theirs that we read recently, and then one literary book that I need to talk about. Okay. One is, we read The Wizard of Oz together, which I've never read the book. Mm-hmm. It's one of those cases where the movie is probably the better.
Okay.
I want to read the book because my kids haven't watched the movie yet. And Rennie, which is probably a little scary for her still. Okay. But it is it is so seeped in the cultural. Like, we watched a Phineas and Ferb that was based on Wizard of Oz. They don't know what it's based on, but everyone just assumes the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the. I mean, you don't even teach people that. It just is.
Yeah, everyone assumes you've seen it at some point.
Yeah, or you know it even if you've never seen it. It's one of the movies you don't even have to see to know. Anyways, we read the book just because I thought, hey, it's free on Gutenberg and we'll try it. It's interesting because at the beginning, Frank L. Baum says he wanted to write a kind of a fairy tale, but he wanted to take out all the scary stuff, which I thought was kind of interesting. That's kind of anti-Lewis. Lewis is like, the scary stuff's good for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not that there's not peril, but it really is just like a series of things that happen. And like Dorothy rarely actually does things happen to Dorothy, and she happens to do things that get her out of it. I mean, there's no more explanation about the water hardly than in the, just you defeated the witch by accidentally covering her with water. Oh, you did this you got them rid of this because this field mice showed up randomly. It just structurally, it was a very interesting thing that it's interesting in the sense that things happen, but from a plot point of view, very little of it happens from the characters choosing to do things on purpose.
That seems problematic.
It's very strange. Now, Phil loves it. I mean, he's read 3 or 4 more books since then.
Huh.
And, I mean, it is very interesting. I mean, it is actually fascinating to think that at one point no one knew Wizard of Oz, and then this guy came up with a Cowardly Lion, a Tin Man, a Scarecrow. I mean,
and there's a lot of books in that series.
I think there's 14 he wrote, and there's 40 altogether.
40 all the yeah, because a lot of other people wrote books after them. And
but I mean, it really is an astounding work of imagination in the sense that we forget that it didn't exist. Yeah. And then this guy just came up with all this stuff.
And
there's flying monkeys. I mean, this is not normal fairy tale stuff. It's not like you're using fairies over again. I mean, it's all new. Yeah. So from that point of view, it's interesting. But yeah, there's something about the motivations that just
feels off.
Feels a little off. Yeah. And I don't know if it keeps that way or whether they change it up.
It is interesting, though, again, considering that it must have been a really popular book series at the time. If they continue to make him after him and like that many books, but just the movie just so completely eclipsed it.
It's
an interesting thing to think about in terms of longevity of series that we think are really important to us, but how important will they be down the road?
And the thing is, the movie, it changes tons of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so if you were a book purist, you'd be mad at The Wizard of Oz.
I think it's kind of funny, too. You said that you wrote it not wanting a fairy tale without things that scare kids.
And then the witch is like super scary for kids.
Yeah.
The witch just shows up at the end and she's kind of mean and
we're not even talking about Return to Oz, which apparently is full of nightmare fuel.
We need to go watch that, Tim.
That could be an experience.
So anyways, it was interesting. There's some neat things in it, like the China people that are all made out of China.
Okay.
And they just go through it's a little bit like a Gulliver's Travels, where like they
encounter weird
stuff. Weird things and keep moving.
Okay.
Maybe that's a better way of looking at it than saying the plot's wrong. It's more just like a travel through an interesting land.
I wonder if there used to be more. There's a kind of motive fairy tale like that. Like Pinocchio has a lot of weird. Pinocchio is almost more of a morality tale in a lot of ways. I mean, that's kind of the point. But the world that he explores doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And maybe that was just a thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Dorothy gets like the first chapter. This is tornado. There's none of this like setup of like people being played by other people like in the movies. Just like
right.
Like she's just taking him a tornado. And then when she comes back, they had built a new house already, and they're like, "Oh, where have you been?" And like, there's no like, it just and it ends. So there's never any sort of like deep emotional anything. It's just sort of. It is very funny though, because like the Tin Man's always like crying about things, and he's like, "I wish I had a heart," and the Scarecrow's always like figuring out the problem. I mean, that sort of clever stuff was even in the book, even more than in the movie.
That's nice.
So, anyways, it was interesting.
Cool.
And then one more is Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor.
I'm guessing this is not something you read to your kids.
No, I didn't know. Do not. No. Wise Blood, it was a fascinating book.
Yeah?
I really enjoyed it.
Now, was this your first Flannery O'Connor?
Yeah, I had read a short story or two between English class or whatever.
Okay.
But it's very hard to describe. It's basically black comedy. It's about this guy, Hazel Motes, who basically is trying to convince himself that he doesn't care about Jesus. And he starts this Church of Christ Without Christ. And there's this kind of crazy guy that follows him around called Enoch Emery. And then there's this false prophet guy, Asa Hawks, who says he blinded himself with a lie in order to prove his devotion to Jesus. It's like something...
I've heard Flannery O'Connor's style tends to be called Southern Gothic.
Yeah, it's
because it's down south, but there's all these sort of characters and scenarios that are just slightly askew.
There's this guy in a gorilla suit that Enoch Emery's all jealous of, and there's this daughter of this of the prophet guy who's just immoral. It's bizarre. I started reading it, and I think I was taking it too seriously.
Oh, really?
In the sense that you're supposed to laugh more. It's supposed to be more. It's supposed to be taken ridiculous. Some of it.
Okay.
There's also serious things being said, but it's just a weird style. It's like something. I can't think of his name. Who does all the crazy like Beetlejuice and what's that director?
Oh, Tim Burton.
Tim Burton. It's almost feel like Tim Burton could do a movie of this. I mean, it'd be more thematically rich than some of his is.
Right.
But that sort of dark but humorous kind of weird combo style might work. And there is a movie apparently they made of it.
Oh, really?
I've not seen it, but it's
interesting.
But the fascinating thing is the main theme really is that he keeps trying to escape Jesus because all this idea of sin and, they need to come to Jesus and repent and all. He keeps trying to escape it and he can't. And that's the fascinating thing that in the end, basically, he gives up trying to run away from him. Now, Flannery O'Connor's Catholic, and the ending also is very Catholic, but there's a lot of this sort of penance, like working your, which was really disappointing because I love the idea of that. Basically, he kept trying to escape and God wouldn't let him go. But this idea of just like free grace is not quite there, which it was kind of disappointing in the last chat. But her writing style is also fabulous, and it was a mesmerizing read in many ways. Once you got into kind of the weirdness that it is, like there's the Enoch Emery kind of worships this shrunken person that's in this museum, and he steals it and to worship it, and this car that main character buys for like $50, and he keeps trying. It's a strange book, but I really liked it.
Okay.
So if you want to try something different, I think the farther I got into, the more I got kind of
the style she was
going for. And I think from what I've read, people come from a non-Christian point of view, get different things out of it or don't understand it in the same way.
Oh, okay.
There are just some sort of ideas about sin and guilt that if you think God's not important, come off differently.
Interesting.
Because she just takes it serious. To her, it's a good thing that he finally goes back to religion. And
but some people don't take it that way.
Especially since it's such a weird book. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When did you read that?
It would have been this fall sometime.
Okay.
Probably after Hellboy.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So that I got that from the bakery when they closed down or when we sold it.
Was that last year?
Yeah,
in
March.
I guess it was. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it took you a while to actually get to it.
Oh yeah, I stole a couple books and that was the first one I've read.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, again, the weekly hijack is ongoing with Babylon 5, and you should really check that out.
Yeah, please subscribe. We're excited about it. Honestly, I look forward to it every Sunday night. I love watching Babylon 5. It's one of the great TV shows.
And if you'd like to support our podcast, whether it's this one or the weekly hijack, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on iTunes.
And just share the podcast with friends. Visit our Facebook page. Say hi sometime.
And of course, all podcast episodes are available at derailedtrainsofthought.blogspot.com.
I guess that's it then. And I suppose before more of those weird things come out, we should probably mosey on out.
I'm gonna sharpen up my blade here a little bit. Why don't you set up your next soundtrack?
Okay. So, I've been playing through Final Fantasy IV with my kids, and I was just reminded, since we were talking about plot, it's a very, I won't say straightforward. It's very simple in the sense that
old school.
It's old school. Thank you. I'm like, wow. It's just old school. It's like this happens, and it just keeps moving, and characters come in, they leave, and I need revenge, and you're my brother, and I've become good, and it's just very pulpy in some ways, which has been a lot of fun. And there's even parts where and meanwhile somewhere the bad guys are plotting. You see what the bad guys are plotting. Anyways, that's the song that gets remixed for this remix here. The remix is Somewhere to Hide. It's remixed by Highbound and Loca Lefevre. I don't know how. I would have something. I can't pronounce names.
Close enough.
Close enough. I really dig this song. It's my return to Final Fantasy after a year of trying to pick other things. So I hope you enjoy. And Tim, let's get going here.
Yeah. Hopefully this place will still exist long enough for us to go.
Or not exist long enough for us to go?
Well, it is. That's right. We're in non-existence.
Yeah. So hopefully we can exist again.
I think we still exist. It's just the world doesn't exist.
But how are...
Because it's complicated. Just trust me.
Okay. Sounds good.
That's the way it works.
Okay. Well, this has been Nick.
And this is Tim.
Adios.
Bye.